The cold slap of the wet, spoiled milk against the lockers echoed through the vaulted, marble-tiled hallways of Oak Ridge Academy, a sound so violently out of place in this sanctuary of trust funds and legacy admissions that it made the very air freeze. Maya stood there, her small, trembling frame dwarfed by the towering row of metal doors, the sour stench of the dairy seeping into the worn threads of her oversized, faded, navy blue sweater, a garment that practically screamed her outsider status among the sea of tailored blazers and cashmere cardigans. Surrounding her was a tightening circle of laughter, sharp and predatory, led by Chloe Sterling, a girl whose perfectly glossed lips curled into a sneer, so rehearsed, so casually cruel that it belonged on a seasoned sociopath rather than a high school senior. Chloe twirled a lock of her impeccably flat-ironed blonde hair, her diamond stud earrings catching the harsh, fluorescent light, and whispered something to her sycophants that sent them into fresh fits of cruel giggles, the sound piercing Maya's ears like shattered glass. They expected Maya to cry, to fold inward like a fragile piece of origami as she always did, to silently scrub the humiliating mess from her scuffed sneakers and apologize for merely existing in their rarefied orbit. But what Chloe, with her generational wealth and her father's name plastered on the school's new science wing, fundamentally failed to realize in that breathless, agonizing moment of manufactured superiority was that Maya's silence was not born of submission, but of a quiet, desperate survival. A survival strictly mandated by the one person in Maya's life who terrified even the monsters hiding in corporate boardrooms. Before Maya could even blink the stinging tears from her deep brown eyes, a shadow detached itself from the periphery of the crowd, a figure whose mere footfalls, the sharp, rhythmic, unyielding clack of Christian Louboutin heels against the linoleum, caused the temperature in the corridor to plummet by 10 degrees. The laughter choked, dying instantly in the throats of the bullies as the crowd parted like the Red Sea, revealing a woman whose tailored, charcoal gray suit fit like armor, her eyes dark, obsidian pools of absolute, uncompromising judgment fixing directly onto Chloe's suddenly pale face. Man, what happened next? I am telling you, you are not ready for the absolute annihilation that was about to unfold. So pull up a chair, lock your doors, and stay with me. Because this isn't just a story about revenge. It is a masterclass in watching arrogance violently meet its maker. To truly understand the gravity of the nuclear bomb that was about to drop on the sterling reputation of Oak Ridge Academy's elite, you have to rewind. You have to feel the exact texture of the dirt they tried to bury Maya in, to smell the suffocating exhaust fumes of the 2 buses she took every morning just to be treated like a stray dog in a palace. You have to witness the sheer, unadulterated audacity of a girl who thought her daddy's checkbook bought her the right to destroy another human being. Completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb she was gleefully kicking around the cafeteria. The air in that hallway was thick, heavy with the scent of spilled milk, expensive Chanel perfume, and suddenly the sharp, metallic tang of absolute fear radiating from the very kids who thought they ruled the world just 30 seconds prior. They stood paralyzed, trapped in the gravitational pull of a predator they didn't even know existed, watching the impeccably dressed woman step between the ruined, trembling girl and the frozen, terrified bully, the silence stretching out, pulling taut like a piano wire ready to snap and decapitate them all. Long before the milk, long before the cold terror gripping Chloe's throat, there was only the suffocating, relentless grind of Maya's daily existence, a life defined by the rhythmic, exhausting symphony of poverty clashing against relentless ambition. Maya's world was not built on trust funds or ski trips to Aspen. Her world was constructed from the bruised, purple bags under her eyes, the raw, blistered skin of her fingers from scrubbing industrial pots at the diner where she worked under the table just to afford the mandatory Oak Ridge uniform. She smelled perpetually of stale fry grease, cheap lavender soap, and the ancient, dusty paper of library books she devoured under the dim, flickering light of a single bulb in her cramped, drafty bedroom. Her reality was deeply anchored by the fragile, papery warmth of her grandmother's hands that shook with tremors as they smoothed Maya's coarse, thick curls every night, accompanied by a voice that cracked like dried leaves but held the unwavering strength of ancient oaks, constantly whispering that education was the only key to unchaining their family from the cycle of systemic invisibility. Maya wasn't at Oak Ridge to make friends. She wasn't there to attend the opulent, catered winter formals or gossip about who was driving which imported luxury car. She was there on a highly contested, desperately guarded academic scholarship, a golden ticket she had bled for, sweat for, and sacrificed every ounce of her childhood to maintain. Every single day, she walked through the towering, wrought iron gates of the academy, feeling the oppressive weight of the historic stone buildings pressing down on her narrow shoulders. A constant physical reminder that she was an intruder, a glitch in their perfectly curated matrix of privilege. She navigated the crowded hallways like a ghost, an apparition wrapping herself tightly in her oversized, scratchy sweater, desperately trying to minimize her physical footprint, lowering her eyes to the gleaming floor tiles to avoid the casual, cutting stares of her peers. The systemic injustice wasn't just a concept. It was a physical barrier, a suffocating blanket woven from the dismissive sighs of guidance counselors who told her to aim lower, the raised eyebrows of teachers who double-checked her flawless test scores for cheating, and the isolating, deafening silence whenever she sat alone at the scarred wooden table in the furthest corner of the cafeteria. She was entirely alone, completely adrift in a sea of sharks, bearing the entire weight of her family's generational hopes on her frail back, grinding her teeth in the dead of night to stop herself from screaming at the sheer, unfair exhaustion of having to work 10 times harder just to be granted the basic dignity of being perceived as adequate. Yet beneath the trembling exterior, beneath the downcast eyes and the patched backpack, there burned a quiet, agonizingly pure fire, an unwavering diligence fueled by the memory of her grandmother's sacrifices, a silent vow that no amount of humiliation would ever break her focus or force her to surrender her seat at the table. She endured the endless microaggressions, the accidental bumps in the hallway that sent her heavily annotated notebooks sprawling across the floor, the whispered slurs disguised as coughs, swallowing the bitter bile of resentment down a throat raw from holding back tears, focusing only on the ticking clock of graduation that promised an eventual escape from this gilded cage. Contrast that raw, bleeding diligence with the polished, hollow arrogance of Chloe Sterling, a girl whose entire existence was a monument to unearned superiority and unchecked hubris. Chloe smelled constantly, overwhelmingly of Victor and Rolf Flowerbomb and cold, hard entitlement, moving through the school with the predatory grace of a creature entirely confident that the world was built exclusively for her consumption. Her uniform was always perfectly tailored, her skirts hemmed just above the knee in deliberate defiance of the dress code, a defiance the administration willingly ignored because the Sterling family's annual donations kept the school's athletic program afloat. She didn't just walk, she glided, the sharp, authoritative click of her designer loafers against the floorboards acting as a dinner bell for her sycophants. A cruel, vapid chorus of followers who mimicked her every move, laughed at her every biting joke, and functioned as an extension of her own malice. Chloe's cruelty was not born of trauma or misunderstanding. It was a sport, a recreational activity designed to alleviate the crushing boredom of her pampered, frictionless life. She viewed Maya not as a human being, but as a fascinatingly grotesque insect, a stain on the pristine fabric of her reality that needed to be aggressively scrubbed away. The systemic rot ran deep, infecting the very adults charged with protecting the students, manifesting in the way Mr. Harrison, the AP history teacher, would conveniently turn his back to the chalkboard whenever Chloe tossed crumpled wads of paper into Maya's hair. His willful blindness, purchased by the expensive bottle of scotch the Sterlings gifted him every Christmas. Chloe's attacks were surgical, psychological microaggressions designed to erode Maya's sanity piece by painful piece. It was the way she would loudly complain about the strange, ethnic smells in the classroom whenever Maya opened her modest homemade lunch of rice and beans, forcing the embarrassed girl to eat outside in the freezing rain. It was the way Chloe would purposefully schedule mandatory group project meetings at exclusive, expensive cafes that she knew Maya could neither afford nor travel to, subsequently penalizing Maya in the peer evaluations for lack of participation, a calculated bureaucratic assassination of Maya's precious GPA. Chloe thrived on the power imbalance, her eyes gleaming with dark, sadistic amusement every time she witnessed the slight, involuntary flinch of Maya's shoulders, reveling in the intoxicating rush of crushing a girl who had no voice, no defenders, and seemingly no recourse. She operated under the absolute, unquestioned assumption that the universe was a tiered system, and Maya belonged firmly at the bottom, crushed beneath the heel of Chloe's expensive shoes, destined to fail and fade away into the socio-economic oblivion from whence she came. There was no empathy in Chloe, only a terrifying, empty void where a conscience should have been, filled instead with an insatiable hunger to dominate, to humiliate, and to remind the scholarship student every single day that Oak Ridge Academy belonged to the elite, and intruders would be punished severely. The slow, agonizing burn of the daily psychological warfare inevitably escalated. shifting violently from whispered insults and isolated cruelties into a systematic, tangible campaign of destruction that pushed Maya to the absolute brink of her physical and emotional endurance. The turning point arrived with the scent of wet paint and the sickening, wet-tearing sound of heavy cardstock, a sensory nightmare that would forever haunt Maya's memory of her senior year. It was the eve of the highly anticipated state science fair, a competition that carried a substantial monetary grant, a grant Maya desperately needed to pay her grandmother's mounting medical debts and secure her college enrollment. For 3 exhausting months, Maya had sacrificed sleep, food, and sanity, pouring every ounce of her intellect into a meticulously researched project on sustainable water filtration, her hands stained with ink, her eyes bloodshot, her back aching from hunching over a makeshift desk constructed from milk crates in her dimly lit bedroom. She had carefully transported the fragile, complex display to the school's exhibition hall, leaving it overnight as instructed, her heart swelling with a rare, fragile sliver of pride, a fleeting belief that her hard work might finally speak louder than her poverty. But when she arrived the next morning, her chest tight with anticipation, she was met with a scene of utter, devastating wreckage. The cold linoleum floor littered with the shredded, violently destroyed remnants of her labor. The sophisticated filtration unit was smashed, its delicate glass tubing shattered into 1,000 jagged diamonds across the room, and the heavy presentation boards were smeared with thick, foul-smelling neon pink paint, completely obliterating months of painstaking data analysis. Maya fell to her knees, the sharp edges of the broken glass biting through her worn jeans, tearing into her flesh. But she felt absolutely no physical pain, only a hollow, echoing void of despair threatening to swallow her completely. She bit her trembling lower lip until the metallic, warm taste of copper flooded her mouth, desperately trying to cage the agonizing, feral scream building in her lungs, refusing to give the hovering, snickering shadows in the doorway the satisfaction of her absolute breakdown. Standing just outside the hall, holding a half-empty coffee cup with casual indifference, was Chloe, her blue eyes sparkling with vicious, unadulterated triumph, offering a slow, mock-sympathetic pout that acted like salt rubbed aggressively into an open, bleeding wound. No cameras covered that specific angle of the hall, no teachers were present, and when Maya desperately dragged the indifferent principal to the scene, she was met with cold, bureaucratic sighs, told that without hard evidence, she shouldn't make wild, defamatory accusations against a pillar of the school community. The injustice was a physical weight, a suffocating, heavy stone pressing down on Maya's chest, leaving her gasping for air in a world that had collectively decided her pain was an acceptable price for maintaining the comfortable status quo of the wealthy. She swept up the shattered glass with bruised, bleeding fingers, each tear that splashed onto the linoleum a silent, desperate prayer for a salvation she no longer believed would ever come. Yet the salvation Maya desperately prayed for was not some ethereal, divine intervention, nor was it a fairy godmother waving a magic wand. It was something vastly more terrifying, infinitely more relentless, and fundamentally rooted in the cold, unyielding mechanics of the law. Enter Judge Eleanor Vance, a woman who did not just practice the law, but weaponized it, a woman whose name struck absolute, visceral terror into the hearts of corrupt politicians and arrogant corporate titans across the state. Eleanor was Maya's older half-sister, separated by 15 years, a different father, and a lifetime of brutal, clawing ascension from the very same impoverished streets Maya currently navigated. But where Maya absorbed the world's cruelty like a soft, bruised sponge, internalizing the pain Eleanor had calcified, forging herself in the fires of systemic adversity into a diamond-hard, razor-sharp instrument of absolute justice. Eleanor smelled of expensive black coffee, leather-bound precedent volumes, and an intimidating, sterile cleanliness, her physical presence a stark, imposing contrast to Maya's hunched, fragile demeanor. She operated in a world of stark black and white, of indisputable facts and crushing consequences, her courtroom a gladiatorial arena where arrogance was systematically butchered on the altar of the penal code. Eleanor did not speak often, but when she did, her voice was a low, resonant, highly controlled hum, devoid of extraneous emotion, delivering sentences and legal takedowns with the clinical, detached precision of a surgeon amputating a gangrenous limb. The sisters loved each other fiercely, bound by blood and the shared trauma of their upbringing, but Eleanor's demanding, high-profile career often kept her physically distant, relegated to checking in via quick, terse phone calls and ensuring the rent on their grandmother's apartment was silently paid. Maya, fiercely independent and deeply ashamed of her victimization, had categorically refused to burden her intimidatingly successful sister with the petty, high school miseries of Oak Ridge Academy, desperately clinging to the false hope that she could endure the storm alone. But Maya deeply underestimated Eleanor's terrifyingly sharp, perceptive abilities, failing to realize that a woman who could detect a multi-million-dollar perjury hidden within a 300-page tax document could instantly read the agonizing silent narrative written across her little sister's exhausted, bruised body. Eleanor's world was built on noticing the unsaid, the microscopic twitches of a liar's eye, the subtle shifts in posture, and the heavy, suffocating silences that spoke louder than any screamed confession. While Maya thought she was successfully hiding her shattered spirit behind forced, weary smiles and oversized sweaters, Eleanor was silently, methodically cataloging every single discrepancy, every flinch and every shadow haunting her sister's deep brown eyes. The breaking point for Eleanor did not come in a loud, dramatic confession, but rather in the quiet, agonizing observation of Maya's hands during a rare, rushed Sunday dinner at their grandmother's cramped apartment. Eleanor, sitting perfectly straight in her tailored charcoal blazer, sipping her black coffee, watched with narrowing, predatory eyes as Maya repeatedly, subconsciously rubbed the fresh, jagged scars crisscrossing her palms from the shattered glass of the ruined science project. Maya's attempt to quickly hide her trembling, injured hands beneath the table was clumsy, a fleeting motion that sent a shockwave of cold, terrifying realization straight into Eleanor's hyper-vigilant mind. In that exact, suspended second, the loving, albeit distant, older sister vanished entirely, violently replaced by the Honorable Judge Vance, a ruthless apex predator who had just detected the faint, metallic scent of her family's blood in the water. Eleanor did not immediately confront Maya, nor did she offer soft, comforting platitudes. The Honorable Judge Vance did not deal in emotions, she dealt exclusively in irrefutable, crushing evidence, and she immediately initiated a covert, highly sophisticated investigation that would make a federal agency envious. She operated in the shadows, fueled by a cold, simmering rage that burned hotter than 1,000 suns, methodically peeling back the layers of Oak Ridge Academy's pristine, hypocritical facade to expose the rotting, malignant cancer of bullying thriving beneath. She started with the financial records, legally pulling public tax filings and anonymously requisitioning the school's vendor contracts, rapidly mapping the intricate, corrupt web of influence the Sterling family held over the cowardly administration. Eleanor hired a discreet, high-end private investigator, an ex-detective who owed her a substantial professional favor, to systematically pull the city's traffic cam footage and adjacent business security feeds surrounding the school on the exact nights Maya's projects were destroyed, bypassing the school's conveniently malfunctioning internal cameras. The investigation was a masterclass in relentless, quiet obsession. Eleanor spent her nights pacing her minimalist high-rise office, the glow of multiple computer monitors illuminating her sharp, predatory features as she pinned timelines, witness connections, and digital footprints onto a massive corkboard web of absolute damnation. She hacked through the social media veil, utilizing dummy accounts to infiltrate the closed, exclusive group chats where Chloe and her sycophants arrogantly documented their cruelties, downloading dozens of voice notes, mocking photos, and outright confessions of vandalism that the teenagers foolishly believed were temporary and untraceable. The smell of ozone from the overworked printers, the sharp snap of highlighters uncapping, the rhythmic, endless clicking of her mechanical keyboard, these were the sensory anchors of Eleanor's furious, methodical crusade, a stark contrast to the helpless, silent tears Maya shed into her pillow miles away. Eleanor discovered the stolen notebooks tracing a discarded assignment to a specific IP address registered to the Sterling estate. She documented the targeted harassment, compiling a staggering, irrefutable dossier of psychological abuse, property destruction, and systemic negligence by the Oak Ridge faculty. She didn't just build a case against Chloe, she built an ironclad, inescapable, Ryko-style indictment against the entire culture of the school, identifying the exact administrators who had looked the other way, the teachers who had accepted bribes, and the specific board members who protected the wealthy elite. By the end of the third week, Eleanor's desk was covered in a mountain of damning paperwork, a literal paper trail of arrogance that she intended to wrap around the Sterling family's necks and pull tight. She did not want an apology. She did not want a suspension. Eleanor Vance wanted an absolute, highly public slaughter, a complete dismantling of their power structure, and she was prepared to scorch the earth to ensure her little sister never had to flinch again. The sheer volume of the evidence was nauseating, detailing a level of casual sociopathic cruelty that tested even the hardened judge's legendary composure, forcing her to frequently step away from her desk, pressing her cool palms against her eyes, taking slow, measured breaths to suppress the overwhelming urge to drive directly to the Sterling mansion and physically drag Chloe out by her perfectly styled blonde hair. But violence was the weapon of the undisciplined, the chaotic recourse of the powerless, and Eleanor was practically a god in the realm of the law, possessing the power to completely ruin lives with a single strike of her gavel. She neatly aligned the manila folders, the glossy printed screenshots, and the sworn affidavits into a pristine, heavy briefcase, the metallic snap of the latches echoing in her silent office like the terrifying click of a loaded gun, signaling that the hunt was officially over, and the execution was fully prepared. To execute her masterstroke, Eleanor understood that a private meeting in the principal's office would be a catastrophic waste of her meticulously gathered arsenal, an environment where the Sterling family's money could simply buy silence, sweep the abuse under the expensive Persian rugs, and legally gag Maya with a hefty settlement. No, the exposure had to be agonizingly public, overwhelmingly undeniable, and strategically timed to inflict maximum reputational damage, completely stripping the antagonists of their societal armor in front of the very peers they sought to impress. The opportunity presented itself perfectly in the form of the Oak Ridge Academy's annual Benefactors Gala and Open Board Hearing, a wildly pretentious, highly publicized event held in the school's grand, mahogany-paneled auditorium, attended by the city's wealthiest elite, local politicians, and the entire student body. Eleanor orchestrated her entry with the tactical precision of a military strike, utilizing her extensive network of judicial contacts to secure a spot on the evening's guest speaker docket, ostensibly to deliver a keynote address on ethics and integrity in future leaders, a title drenched in such heavy, dark irony it practically dripped. The week leading up to the gala was an agonizing ticking clock, the suspense tightening like a vice around the narrative as Maya, completely unaware of her sister's explosive trap, endured the escalating daily torments with a terrifying hollow resignation, physically wilting under Chloe's increasingly bold public humiliations. The sensory details of the impending climax were palpable. The suffocating, heavy scent of expensive floor wax in the auditorium, the blinding, harsh glare of the spotlight being tested on the grand stage, the hushed, excited whispers of the students fitting into their formal wear, entirely oblivious to the incoming hurricane. Chloe spent the days prior loudly boasting about her father's impending induction as chairman of the board, her arrogance swelling to grotesque proportions, strutting through the hallways in her custom-tailored gala gown, tossing cruel, biting comments at Maya about her cheap, thrift store dress. Eleanor, meanwhile, remained a silent, invisible ghost, carefully planting a secure, high-definition projector connection behind the main podium, coordinating with her loyal investigator to ensure the auditorium's massive presentation screens were hardwired directly to her encrypted laptop, bypassing the school's tech team entirely. The trap was laid with chilling perfection, a steel cage of evidence completely surrounding the oblivious predators who were busy gorging themselves on their own ego, adjusting their diamond necklaces and silk ties, eagerly walking straight into a public slaughterhouse entirely of their own making. As the heavy, velvet curtains of the auditorium finally drew back, revealing a sea of wealthy, powerful faces bathed in warm, golden light, the tension was so incredibly thick, so physically oppressive, you could practically taste the ozone in the air, a violent storm brewing just beneath the surface of the polite applause. The countdown reached 0, the trap slammed shut, and the absolute destruction of Chloe Sterling and her arrogant dynasty was officially, irreversibly in motion. Every second that ticked by felt like a physical blow to Maya, who sat huddled in the very back row of the auditorium, shrinking into the uncomfortable wooden seat, her hands sweating profusely, praying only for the torturous night to end so she could escape back to the safety of her grandmother's quiet apartment. She watched Chloe sitting in the front row, VIP section, laughing obnoxiously loud, clinking crystal glasses of sparkling cider with the principal, a sickening display of power and untouchability that made Maya's stomach churn with bitter, helpless acid. But as the principal confidently approached the microphone to introduce the surprise keynote speaker, raving about honoring legal integrity and moral fortitude, Maya's breath hitched, her heart stopping completely as she saw the familiar, terrifyingly sharp silhouette emerging from the wings. The moment Judge Eleanor Vance stepped onto the polished wooden stage, the entire atmosphere within the massive, crowded auditorium instantly fractured, the warm, jovial energy violently sucked out of the room, replaced by a sudden, freezing, absolute silence that physically pressed against the eardrums of every person present. Eleanor did not walk. She advanced, her tailored, immaculate white suit glowing fiercely under the spotlight, her expression a terrifying, immobile mask of cold, calculated fury that immediately caused the principal to visibly swallow hard and step back from the podium, instinctively recognizing a predator entirely out of his league. She didn't bother with the microphone stand, aggressively ripping the mic free with a sharp, echoing shriek of feedback that made the wealthy donors in the front rows violently flinch, clutching their pearls and adjusting their expensive ties in sudden, inexplicable discomfort. The dialogue was sparse, sharp, and delivered with the rhythmic, concussive force of a sledgehammer striking concrete. "Ethics," Eleanor began, her low, resonant voice vibrating through the massive speakers, completely bypassing the polite introductory drivel, "is not a buzzword you print on glossy brochures to justify the exorbitant tuition you charge to harbor sociopaths." The entire room gasped collectively, a wave of shock rippling through the sea of expensive suits and gowns, but Eleanor's dark, uncompromising eyes immediately locked onto Chloe, who was sitting directly in the center of the front row, her arrogant smirk suddenly faltering, replaced by a twitching, panicked confusion. The temperature in the room seemingly plummeted 20 degrees, the scent of expensive catered salmon and fine champagne violently overpowered by the sharp, metallic tang of pure, unadulterated fear radiating from the Sterling family as Eleanor slowly, deliberately leaned over the podium, staring directly into Chloe's soul. "You do not know me," Eleanor stated softly, yet the words echoed like thunderclaps. "But I know every single thing about you, Chloe Sterling. I know your habits, I know your cruelty, and I know exactly what you did on the night of October 14th. The color violently drained from Chloe's face, leaving her a ghostly, trembling white. Her father standing up abruptly, his face flushed red with indignation, loudly demanding to know the meaning of this outrage, shouting empty threats about lawyers and defamation in his sterile, arrogant corporate jargon. Eleanor simply raised a single, perfectly manicured hand, a gesture of such immense, raw authority that Mr. Sterling's voice cracked and died in his throat, his blustering entitlement completely neutered by the sheer, terrifying force of the judge's presence. "Sit down, Arthur," Eleanor commanded, utilizing his first name to immediately strip him of his unearned status, the absolute finality in her tone, leaving no room for negotiation or debate. "You will sit down, you will shut your mouth, and you will finally watch the horrifying, malignant reality of what your money has created. Because this court is officially in session, and absolutely none of you are immune from the verdict." Maya, watching from the furthest, darkest corner of the room, gripped the armrests of her seat so fiercely her knuckles turned completely white, her breath catching in her throat as she realized the magnitude of the nuclear strike her sister was executing on her behalf. The stark juxtaposition was breathtaking. The wealthy, powerful elite, completely paralyzed, trapped in their expensive velvet seats, suddenly held entirely hostage by the righteous, terrifying vengeance of a woman who had clawed her way out of the exact poverty they so casually mocked. Eleanor tapped a single key on her laptop, and the massive, high-definition screen behind her flared violently to life, casting a harsh, unforgiving white light over the trembling faces of the bullies, signaling the absolute end of their reign of terror. The exposure was a methodical, highly public, and absolutely devastating butchery, an overwhelming avalanche of undeniable evidence that completely buried the Sterling family and the corrupt administration under the crushing weight of their own documented malice. Eleanor utilized heavy, rhythmic anaphora, her voice striking like a relentless gavel, echoing across the cavernous room as the massive screens behind her began rapidly flashing high-definition, unassailable proof of Chloe's cruelty. "You thought she was alone," Eleanor boomed, the screen suddenly displaying the recovered, highly illegal security footage of Chloe and her friends violently smashing Maya's science project. The clear, time-stamped video capturing Chloe's face twisted in an ugly, sadistic laugh. "You thought her silence was weakness," she continued, the screen brutally shifting to massive, blown-up screenshots of the private, vicious group chats, exposing every racial slur, every calculated plot to ruin Maya's grades, and every arrogant boast about dodging consequences. "You thought your money bought immunity from the absolute, crushing consequences of your sociopathy," Eleanor roared, the screen now displaying a legally obtained, highlighted paper trail showing the principal explicitly ignoring Maya's formally filed complaints, followed immediately by the deposit records of the Sterling family's donations matching the exact dates of the cover-ups. The absolute, stark silence of the auditorium was broken only by the horrifying, pathetic sound of Chloe openly sobbing, her perfectly applied makeup running in dark, ugly streaks down her pale face as she desperately tried to hide behind her horrified, thoroughly humiliated mother. The arrogant father, Arthur, who had stood so tall and commanding just moments before, was now slumped entirely forward in his chair, his head buried deep in his hands, completely broken by the realization that his entire legacy, his business reputation, and his social standing were currently being publicly incinerated by a sitting judge in front of every important figure in the city. The ticking clock of suspense completely shattered, replaced by the chaotic, overwhelming reality of justice being violently served, a visceral, undeniable reckoning that stripped the powerful antagonists of every single defense mechanism they possessed. Eleanor did not stop. She methodically named the complicit teachers. She pointed directly at the cowardly board members who had enabled the abuse, dissecting their failures with the clinical, unfeeling precision of a forensic pathologist examining a rotting corpse. This academy, Eleanor stated, her voice dropping to a dangerously soft, lethal whisper that forced everyone to lean in, is a monument to moral bankruptcy. But let me make one thing absolutely crystal clear. Maya Vance is not a glitch in your system. She is the undeniable proof of your failure, and as of this exact second, your reign of unchecked terror is completely, permanently over. The sheer volume of the undeniable proof, the devastating juxtaposition of the broken, weeping bully against the terrifying, unyielding judge, created an atmosphere of absolute, crushing defeat for the antagonists, an undeniable, highly public downfall from which the Sterling family would never, ever, financially or socially recover. The board members were already furiously whispering amongst themselves, violently distancing themselves from the toxic, sinking ship of the Sterling dynasty, desperately trying to salvage their own miserable reputations before the judge decided to legally indict them all. The police, whom Eleanor had quietly requested prior to the event, were now visibly standing at the main exits of the auditorium, their presence a stark, terrifying reminder that this was not merely a school disciplinary matter, but a highly documented, criminal harassment case. Chloe, hyperventilating and completely destroyed, looked up at the towering, brilliant woman on the stage, finally realizing with crushing, agonizing clarity that she had not just bullied a weak, defenseless student. She had foolishly awakened a sleeping, fire-breathing dragon who had just burned her entire world to absolute ash. In the heavy, ringing aftermath of the absolute destruction, the chaotic, frantic energy of the auditorium slowly dissolved into a shocked, deeply reverent awe, the crowd parting silently, respectfully, as Eleanor stepped down from the stage and walked with terrifying, unhurried grace straight up the center aisle, her eyes locked entirely on the back row. She stopped in front of Maya, the terrifying, ruthless judge instantly melting away, violently replaced by the soft, fiercely protective older sister, who reached out with gentle, trembling hands to pull the weeping, overwhelmed teenager into a crushing, desperate embrace. Maya buried her face deep into the crisp, expensive fabric of Eleanor's white suit, the scent of lavender and expensive coffee wrapping around her like an impenetrable fortress, her body shaking, not with fear, but with the overwhelming, violently cathartic release of a year's worth of silent, agonizing trauma finally bleeding out of her soul. She was not alone. She had never been alone. And as she looked back towards the stage, she saw Chloe being physically escorted out by security, her parents following closely behind, their heads bowed in total, irreparable disgrace, their immense power completely shattered by a girl they had deemed utterly worthless. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and relentlessly just. The principal was immediately forced into a highly public, humiliating resignation. Several teachers faced severe credential reviews, and the Sterling family quietly, cowardly relocated to another state, desperately fleeing the massive, suffocating wave of social exile and impending legal lawsuits. Maya stood incredibly tall in the empty, sunlit hallway of Oak Ridge Academy the following Monday, the oppressive, suffocating weight of systemic injustice permanently lifted from her narrow shoulders, her scarred hands tightly gripping her textbooks, completely unafraid, deeply respected, and absolutely untouchable. The air in the school smelled different now. It smelled clear, bright, and deeply vindicating, the haunting echoes of the bullies' cruel laughter entirely erased, violently replaced by the quiet, powerful hum of a girl finally claiming her rightful, hard-earned space in the world. Now look at me, right here. Look at the absolute power of what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. When you arrogantly assume that the people you step on don't have absolute giants waiting in the shadows, ready to tear your entire universe apart to protect them. This isn't just about the immense satisfaction of watching a bully violently fall from grace. This is a stark, necessary reminder that justice, true, unyielding justice, isn't always blind. Sometimes it is a highly observant, absolutely ruthless sister with a gavel and a flawless memory for pain. If you felt that absolute chill down your spine, if you felt that righteous, burning vindication when the screen lit up and the arrogant crumbled into dust, then you know exactly what to do next. Smash that like button. Share this story with every single person who needs a reminder that the underdogs always have teeth, and drop a comment below telling me about a time you watched arrogance finally, brutally meet its incredibly well-deserved match. Do not ever let anyone convince you that your quiet endurance is a sign of surrender. And do not ever forget that the most terrifying predators do not roar before they strike. They gather evidence, they wait for the perfect public moment, and they execute their vengeance with the cold, absolute precision of the law. You made it to the end of the massacre. You witnessed the absolute triumph of the pure-hearted. So hit subscribe, keep your head high, protect your peace fiercely, and always, always remember to tread very carefully around the quiet ones, because you never, ever know who is sitting silently at their dinner table.